evening, everyone. You are welcome to Jesus House Houston. We are so glad to have you with us on a Sunday evening. I know that some of us may have been to our virtual services, but today was going to be a little different for us at Jesus House. As we know, with the country has been going through what we can call a tense moment, but it's not really a tense moment because for parts of society, it's been tense for decades. So what may be tense in the media now is not really tense. It has been there for ages. And so we are, on the one hand, this is a sad thing, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity that we want to see, we want to make sure that we seize the opportunity to change the conversation. But not just a conversation, because words by themselves can't do much. But if we can, by our conversation, change the hearts of men, that can make a much deeper impact. So we're glad that you've joined us. Feel free to share the feed. Feel free to share the info on, share the links on Facebook and Instagram. Start a watch party. We would like to get your friends on. My name is Bally. I serve at Jesus House as the lead pastor, and I'll be joined in this conversation that we've started titled today, saying Sides of the Black Coin. And essentially what that is just, to be able to look at the history, the status, and potential of the relationship between the African American community who has been in the United States and lived here, and this is their home, and the African immigrant community. Unfortunately, over the years, there has been an identity in that we have the same skin color, but there has been minimal integration at best, and sometimes an antagonistic and almost derisive attitude at worst. And we want to ask these questions that, how is it that the people who are so similar and who originate from the same place have gotten to this place in their relations? And what can we do? What are the things that brought us here? How can we create synergies within our community? And what has the church done? And what has the church in both communities done to be able to bridge this divide? Now, I always say, it's one conversation of many conversations. But as I'm hoping that we're all here today as we go on, we realize that it's still an important conversation that needs to be addressed and can help in moving the entire Black race in our move on our self-integration even further forward. So I'm glad to have with us today Pastor Ruemu Agiri and Dr. Ashlei Evans. I thank you guys so much for taking the time. You could have been resting on a Sunday evening, but you all came out to hang out with us. Our moderator for today is going to be Mrs. Christina Debo. You'll see her pop through every so often, but you'll be hearing her voice asking us the questions. But I'll let our panelists kind of introduce themselves and then toss it back to Christina. Dr. Ashlei.
I'm Dr. Ashlei, and I am African American, born and raised here in Houston, Texas.
Like what you do?
Well, I'm currently head of school for Time of Celebration Christian Academy. Most of my experience is in education.
Thank you.
Awesome. My name is Pastor Ruemu Agiri. I serve at Alpha and Omega International Ministry of Faith. I am the Chief Operating Officer there, and that's mainly what I do. I am full-time ministry, but I do other things on the side, but I am chasing the Lord.
Multiple things. Okay. Ms. Christina? You can, sure.
And I am the moderator, Mrs. Degbo. I worship here at Jesus House Houston, and when I'm not here, I'm also in education like Dr. Evans, working for a district within the Houston area. And just so you know, as we go through and talk to our panelists, feel free to be in the comment section and ask any questions, and we will try to get the panelists to answer for us. All right, so we can begin. So the first question I would like to ask the panelists is, what were their first encounter with the other culture? Anything that comes to mind that you can think that can resonate with some of the viewers. So whoever would like to start, I'll start off with Dr. Evans.
So I didn't realize at the time that my first encounter with African immigrants and first generation Africans was in middle school. And at the time, there was no difference. We I was at a predominantly black school, and so we all looked alike, and so there was no differentiation. But as I got older, and as they got older, they started to become more influenced within their culture, and so that's when we started recognizing that there were a few cultural differences, and they told me about their culture, and that was it. That was my first encounter.
I was actually born in Nigeria. We moved here when I was about 8 years old. And so I've spent the majority of my life here. And I mean, I feel like I was born here, But even before I came here, I didn't have an accent. I didn't have an African accent. I spoke like this because we had missionaries come and lived in our compound in Eku. So I played with their kids. They had, kids, and I grew up with them, and we talked like this. I talked like this to them. So when I moved here, when we came here, my father was here before my mom and my sister and I came. And as soon as I got here, I just kept going. I had no, because I was assimilated into, I'm Nigerian, so I understand the culture. There was no weirdness about that. And then with that, coming to the States, I felt like I fit right in as well, because I had already grown up with Caucasian children, in Nigeria. So I just kind of, it was easy for me. I think I should say it that way. It was very easy for me to fit in when I came in here, and just to understand the culture both then and now, because I am Nigerian.
Okay. I came here. I was also born in Nigeria. Came here for college, and I went to historically black college. So now I want to create even more context. I went to historically black college. On campus was very African American, but off campus was very Caucasian. I went to college in the middle of Missouri. And so I think one of my biggest things was realizing in that initial period that there's multiple Americas. And that was, very, because when I was in Nigeria making the jump, one of the things that the school sold was you will feel at home because it's African Americans, it's multicultural, which they were technically right on. But what they didn't say was, well, you're going to have to leave this campus sooner or later, and when you leave, this is what you're going to run into. And so one of my, at least first interactions, my observations was not necessarily direct. I'm going to say more so the observation of how different the two worlds were. So you had classmates who were in school, and you hate to be stereotypical, but the academic pursuit was kind of just a hover of their priorities. It was there, but it wasn't like the biggest thing. And then you left campus and you would see the little fraction of white students in the community, and they were having internships, and it kind of bothered my mind and made me curious as to why is there this difference. Well, when we're on campus, we're in the same classes, right? We're with the same professors. But for some reason, I go in the community and my classmates from school are working retail-ish, working factory-ish, whereas Caucasian students have the bank internships, have the corporate gigs, the co-ops, and the management programs, the trainee programs. And so that was, I think, maybe not an impression, but it kind of sparked a curiosity to let me know that there's something a little amiss in the society that we live in, and it's at the time anyway.
Okay, so I want to go back to Dr. Evans. You said that as you were with students, other African American and African American immigrants, how once they got older, there became a divide. And I think that leads back into the new question of misconceptions. So as everyone got older, what changed that sometimes brought up misconceptions between the cultures?
I would probably say just the different values from the different backgrounds. Whatever the family values were, the dynamic started to change. So for instance, I know personally, being in an African American household, I'm the first highly educated individual. And so my grandmother raised me, and she was not, she didn't have the knowledge of, pushing education. But I noticed my friends who were from African households, their family mandated, like, you're going to college. And so, like, they had that push, that support, versus what I had seen in my household and, my other family members. It was us who made the decision to be successful and to go for it. There was no one telling us or cheering us on, like, this is what you need to do. It was either you do it or you don't. It doesn't matter. But what I witnessed and what I recognized with my African friends, they had that support system. It had been placed in their values that this is what needs to happen. And so as we did get older in middle school, high school, of course, was a lot more intense because you were intentional about what you did, because ultimately you knew the direction you were going in. And so it's just a matter of that self-motivation versus the motivation of the family and the culture.
Okay, and I'm gonna bring it over here to Pastor Ruemu to talk about his interactions and misconceptions being from the African immigrant side.
Well, I agree totally with Doctor. I believe we do have I want to say Nigerians, we have like a high respect, high honor culture, right? So it's kind of like the thing is, you get sent out as a child not to come home to dishonor or to bring disgrace, to the family, right? So it's like we were groomed and made that way. It's almost like the fear of God was placed in us, like, you better not type thing.
Come third. Don't come second.
Second for what? Everybody got a 70 in the class. For what? What do you mean 70? So it's just like, so that had been placed in us, like almost brutally, embedded in us. And I think that's the difference there. Even if there was no true support from the Nigerian, I look at it different. When you were saying support, it's kind of like, yes, our families would support us, but it's more like
it's more of a threat.
A threat. Like, it's more of a threat. I don't want to go that way, but it's more of a threat. It's not too much support. Like, okay, let me put it this way. I play football, right? And I love football, right? And I wanted support in football. A lot of my friends, they had African-American friends, they had that support, like they pushed them, they took them to combines, they did all of these things. And you saw their parents pushing them, like, because they, it's a sport thing. Right. Now, I love sport. I wanted that type of support from my family, from my parents as well, and I did not get it at all. Like, it's face your book, I was very talented. I was very fast, I track, football, I believe I was very talented, and I believe if I was pushed a little bit more, encouraged in that aspect, maybe spend some money, to, push me to do certain things in that area, who knows? Could have been doing something else, right?
But you wouldn't have been doing the Lord's work.
You see, so that's not, that's another thing. Our parents know the will of God for our lives, right? No, but that's essentially what it is, So it's more like more focus on education. They pushed us to focus on education. You either a lawyer, a doctor, whatever the case may be. We want you to come back with honor. We want you to make our family proud, in a sense, right? So yeah, I totally agree with that.
So just to piggyback off of that, I think at the core of this is also a sense of difference of value system, right? I think that's something that you guys have both, because as he was talking, I start to remember what it is. It's not really, when we think about it, right, it's not necessarily the degree, it is the bragging rights. Your parents will say, I had a friend who I think they had a sibling who said she wanted to go and study something like journalism or English literature. The guy had a father said, very unlike, but it was very witty. I love it. He said, "You can study whatever you want. I'm paying for you to study economics." So you kind of made that line very clear. No, you're not going abroad for me to brag that you studied English literature. That brings me no hype. I can't tell my friends that.
Right.
But I can tell my friends, I have a British trained or American trained economists or accountants.
Right.
And so those things bled across the way. Right now, on the flip side, I remember, and I want to say something, and this is something that I think in the conversation I had with everyone here, but I want to make sure that we say this. A lot of the things we're saying, some of it are experiences, but we're going to be very careful that we don't paint with broad brushes. So, because as much as we're saying some things that are typical, there are some Nigerian families who don't care about higher education, who it's not their priority. There are a lot of African American families that, and I can attest because when I was in school, in every scenario, you find, there's a saying, right? Water will find its level. You're always going to even out with people of like minds. So there's always exceptions to everything, right? But when I was in college, I realized that pressure, right? That value system that we had of not just saying that you went to college, because that's not the point. Of that you had something productive. It wasn't Africans didn't have it. They didn't have. Now there are some folks like Dr. Ashlei who were driven by the pioneer spirit. Or let me not say that alone, but that's a factor, right? Now, so there's those guys and a few others, but then a lot of times it's like, nah, I want this student loan check so I can get this refund. At the time, it was a fascinating thing to me when those refund times, because everybody just became happy. My first year, I didn't know what they were happy about, but I realized that they were happy in those moments. They felt like the plan for this college experience had come. So in a week or two, you would just see everyone with brand new cars, right? At the moment, now everyone could say what their thinking was at the time. They were younger, they were foolish, right? But in those moments, I wasn't driving. I was probably taking the bus because I've done my math with everything I need to get done. It's more important for me to be able to get to school safely and pay my tuition than risk, that not being done. And so what I realized was that those were that priority level, right? That thing that you're afraid of when you go back home. That's a big, a big difference. And for a lot of us, when you come in and you notice that it can be jarring, and I think that's probably what we're going to pivot to. But when I've had those moments of wanting to, or at least the initial moments of wanting to connect, the moment where I see that priorities misalign is a heartbreaking moment.
I want to add to that because, like, I agree with you that not everybody has those values, and it's the same. I guess if I may, tell you my experience because it's family. It's family and households and things like that, and culture, but it's also, you can also see it in the education system, right? I went to Ohio State University, right? And then when I moved back to Houston, I went for a second degree at TSU. And it's just, they're two different worlds, right? Just to your point, where we, for the returns and everything, the return, what you called it? You called it the, I don't even know what it is, because the student loan.
Refund checks.
The refund checks, yeah. See, I never had just like you, I didn't even know what that was, until I started seeing it at, not every university is like that, right? My experience, I'm just explaining my experience at TSU, but I would see that there were moments in the semesters where people, the place is lit, like it's alive, but then the rest of the time it's just dead. Nobody in the classrooms, nothing is happening on campus. But it was never like that at Ohio State. They're like two different worlds. So I think the culture has some distinct, trying to word it very carefully, some distinct characteristics that I think we need to address. I think we need to address it and shed light on it so people kind of we all understand, and maybe some change can come, from, and I think it begins at home with every culture. I think it begins at home and it can transcend into, all the other areas of our lives. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in.
So everyone talked mostly about the academics and the different understanding and background of academics within each culture. But I want to hear more of the societal, things that are happening today, all the protests and things, there's different perspectives. I want to hear more on the societal aspects. I'll let Pastor Bally go first.
I'll go, sure. As far as differences, right? I'm gonna try to wear my pastor hat. Or no, just generally. So I think when you take a bird's eye view, cultures are different, but I think cultures, we have to be very careful. There's the culture of these two groups talking about, but there's also just the fact of we're also talking about different countries, right? Let's also keep that in mind. So there's a general, those of us who came in, you knew that you were coming to a different place. That was part of the deal, so the fact that things are different, shouldn't have surprised us or, offended us or whatever anyway, right? So just to put that on. I think, in my observation, the African immigrant community can sometimes have a chip on their shoulder, what appears to be a chip on our shoulder. And I will be honest, and I'll own it. A lot of Nigerian immigrants, especially, are maybe seen to be guilty of this. However, I don't call it chip on, we call it swag. You can disagree all you want, right? But it just oozes. I'm playing. But unfortunately, that confidence, like Pastor Ruemu said, the drive to be first, the drive to come top of your class, some of that, unfortunately, it gave your parents bragging rights, and we all inherited that. We've inherited this thing of when we are excellent, you get the right to brag. When you are excellent, you come first, you run the race, you come first, you get the right to kind of lord over people. Now, Nigeria is a pretty braggadocious place, but I didn't realize how bad we were until I got here and realized, okay, you need to shut your mouth because people don't do this here. And I noticed it when I see Nigerian kids visiting. Like, if I see young kids like 8, 9, 10, they're teens, and they interact with maybe like second generation kids here, or maybe family members, cousins. It's very different because those kids are always about to win. Everything is a contest. I'm gonna beat you, I'm gonna come first. And they're like, oh, take it, it's not that serious, I think that attitude, for us, it can come off as sometimes aggressive, sometimes we're too ambitious, sometimes they have a chip on our shoulders. Now, on the flip side, I think African Americans, sometimes to us, to the African community, can seem like there is a bit of some on one hand would say there's averagely lazy, right? I use the word average, so it's not total, average. Not driven, unmotivated. Now, this is why we have this discussion. I thank God for bird's eye view and for insight. I've come to appreciate that assessment is unfair. Unfair at worst and incomplete at best, right? Because on its face, it may look like that is a true statement. But when you factor in the systemic issues that have gotten the person that is standing in front of you to where they are, you can't help it. For me, it's like this. If I tell my 2-year-old to get something from the top shelf, that's unfair. He cannot do that without some kind of a ladder, some kind of a boost. So it's the same thing. When we look at African Americans and say, well, you should be more driven, well, you should be this. I'm like, you guys need to also be careful. Those of us who got here, if you always remind anyone who is in the US, 95% of any of us here are middle to upper class in Nigeria. The fact that you were able to get to an embassy and convince someone that you have the means and intent to go study or whatever it was abroad, you are not by any means the bottom of the gutter, right? So we are taking, right, what is the top of African community and comparing it to all, which unfortunately statistically has not been as well off in this community, and trying to make an even comparison, it's a little unfair. There's systemic issues. So we come in able to, by the grace of God, maybe go to college, you go to education, or you come in on some kind of professional visa or whatever. And so you come in literally almost at the top. But you're coming and comparing to society who has literally started not even at the bottom, literally started underground, crawl their way to the bottom, and are just asking for a chance to even just live, to literally be alive at the bottom. And are just trying to crawl their way from the bottom to the middle. And so we see them and say, you're lazy or this or that. It sometimes is an assessment that is a little unfair. And so those are the things that I have kind of observed of both groups, that at some point, and I'm sure we'll delve into this, someone, want to hear what everybody else thinks, but we have to dig into both of those sides. There are other issues there, but I mean, like I said, non-academic, I think that those are my assessments, as I've been here.
And I agree that's a common assessment, because of the simple fact that when I did have conversations similar to this with my African friends, a lot of times they informed me of how when they were overseas in their country, they were educated about America and what was happening in America. But here in America, African Americans were not educated about what's happening around the world. We might take world geography and that's it. And so, that's basic. If you have an innate desire to know about it, you'll do the research on your own. And so a lot of times when African Americans have conversations with African Americans don't have the same level of global knowledge of what's happening. So even my family, I become some advocate for my family to kind of bridge the gap, because a lot of times they had those experiences where they were offended by an African who was confident or what could have been taken off as arrogant, or who spoke to them in a tone that they felt was inappropriate. And so they took it as, this African is feeling entitled. And so with that, the African American, the mindset is, who are you to come and talk to me like that? And you have to understand that is a built up offense, because African Americans are already battling the other racial systemic situations that have been created here in America. And, I know people don't like to go away in the past, but in reality, African Americans were brought up being told they weren't capable of being anything more. And so there was always this line of African Americans can't cross this. And so it is a mental bondage that has taken place and is passed down to generations. And I mean, you will find whole lineages where in the family itself, you're told this is what you'll do, this is all you'll do, or this is the goal for your household, simply because that is a mindset, that a seed that was planted early on. And so when we have one thing, you have to choose to want to know more. And so I've often said that with other African Americans, you may be offended, but did you ever have a conversation? There is a lack of a communication. And so with that, a lot of times they'll say no. A lot of times they've never been in a room where they had to have a conversation. I have a cousin, she's a cop, and she was honest. She said, I used to not like Africans because she had been offended, but she had a partner in her academy that actually was kind to her, and that shifted her whole perspective. And so in the same way, I just let people know, first of all, you have to recognize that's an individual. Although you hear the accent, that's still an individual. In the same way, if another African American offended you, you're not going to turn around and say all African Americans are mean, rude, and disrespectful. That's an individual. And so it really is a mind thing, because in reality, once we get that seed of division and difference and pride and fear out of our mind, then you allow yourself to recognize that we're not so different.
So how do we, just to ask, how do we go about, excuse me, how do we go about uprooting that mindset? Because it is a generational mindset, and just like the Nigerian, we have this generational mindset, I believe, that have, stayed with us, maybe not everybody, but holistically, but how do we take that for everybody here and those that come here from other places? How do we take that generational seed, or at least, shed light on it? Because I know I don't know how easy it will be, because you're in a family that is grooming you and nurturing you in a specific kind of way. And you that have been nurtured and groomed in this way will nurture and groom your offspring in that way. So where do we begin in uprooting that seed or that mindset?
I would definitely say stepping outside your comfort zone. I know for myself, I go in environments with African communities, and it's not one of those things where, my best friend, growing up was African, I was always over her house. That's not how it was. I allowed myself to be uncomfortable going to the environments. And, I was like, if you accept me, you do. If you don't, you don't. But it's going to take both parties being willing to go into each other's different environments. A lot of times, some African Americans have this mindset that, I got to go to Africa to socialize with Africans. Now I'm like, no. I went to South Africa on a mission trip, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, the worship. And I'm like, yeah, you can get it down the street, if you go to the church. But in reality, you're so close. But the thing is, it really is like something in their mind saying, I can't go that far. I'll work with you, I'll go to school with you, I'll walk past you. But the minute you talk about sharing spaces, they won't take that risk. And that's on both sides. Because like I said, I've told a lot of my family members, because sometimes my grandma, sometimes she's like, I don't understand how you have so many African friends. And I'm like, I don't see, yes, the culture is significant, but I see that person. And so a lot of times it is thinking beyond the culture, because even what you said about how can somebody shift from what they've been brought up in, it's just like when you came to Christ. You had a different mindset, but you made a decision to shift, and you took those uncomfortable steps. And so in that same capacity, a lot of times I feel like we have to allow that Christ culture to override the, world social culture, and that will allow us to begin to break down those barriers. Because one thing I have recognized is that there is some form of unity, more so in the church, of African Americans and Africans versus out in the world. Like in the world, it's a complete divide. But in the church, there are more steps being taken, because a lot of leaders, like you, Pastor Bally, you're taking the step. You're recognizing there's a problem. We have to have this conversation. And so it really is making a decision and saying, okay, am I going to allow my upbringing to rule how I function in this world? Or am I going to really be an individual who believes in reconciliation, a minister of reconciliation, and walking this out and connect with a variety of people? And, it's interesting, because I realize, we come from one human race, but it's different nationalities. But we come from one human race, and that race is from Christ. And so when you allow your mind to shift like that, you're like, man, like, who am I to not love my brother or sister from another country because they're from another country or they have an accent? It's like, ultimately, that's still a part of the human race.
That's good.
I'm sorry, I'll make a quick point. There's something I want to piggyback on when you were talking about, when you have African friends and you don't look at it, the culture is a thing, but it's, at the end of the day, it's content of that person's character. One of the most amazing things, and I don't know how much of this you can share, but when you come to a new country, there is a presumption that you should instantly, every time you see a Nigerian or another African, someone who is like you should become friends. So someone just says, oh, so you say I'm Nigerian. They go, oh yeah, there's a Nigerian who's taking that course in the next class. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, in my mind, I'm kind of like, that means nothing to me. It's like anybody could be, and then someone meets you and goes, oh, you're Nigerian, I'm Nigerian, we should be friends. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's a novel moment, right? It's a cool moment that you're Nigerian and we can share a couple of experiences together. But I learned very quickly that not every Nigerian had the content of character that I had. And I'm not saying that, in a means of, trying to feel higher than anyone else, but just similarities. I remember somewhere when I was in school, I took a picture. My sister made this joke when she saw the picture. I had 3 friends, a guy, 2 girls. The guys from Jamaica, girls from Virgin Islands, one girl from Virgin Islands, and another girl from Ghana. So, and these are like two of my closest friends when I was in school. My sister's like, really, Bally? Really? You look like you're not Nigerian? I'm like, you don't understand. Like, guys, this story is before we're in Christ, so just before you go on. But I had this policy when people would go out, and every weekend they would go out. I'm like, look, I work hard, so I work hard and I play hard, which also means I can't afford to play often. So I would save up to play well.
Right.
And I'm like, look, even when it comes to playing and going out and partying, I'm like, the parties I'm going to are not the parties these guys. So even in that sense of value, I'm bringing it down to like the most common thing. I didn't party like that, right? There was a joke when you're in college, and if you can identify, some of us who are too Christian, it's okay. If you are in the places with the paper cups, I'm not there. I'm not being mad. And if I drag myself into places, I got mad, like, why did you bring me here? But my friends would go into places that were, not necessarily about champagne, but just it was a little more decent. You could relax, have a good time, you were in a decent crowd, and all of that. And so who calls the place that they're going to, I'm like, yeah, no, I wouldn't, that's not my flow. The point I'm making is that until we get to that place where the ethnic requirement becomes a necessity, right? Too many of us have lashed ourselves to people based on ethnic compatibility, but it negates the human compatibility. It negates our faith compatibility, right? So like when ladies are getting married and they say, oh, pastor, the guy is not, he's a Christian, but he's not kind of there. And I joke with them and say, you don't understand, you're a faithful server, you're a faithful Christian. I hope this guy will not make you stop serving in church. I hope he will make you, I know some ladies who've said things like, they can't tithe unless their husband clears it, and depends on the month, it just depends, right? And I say, well, did you check this compatibility? So ethnically you were alike, right? There was attraction there. But did you check that your value systems were the same? Value systems sometimes will override ethnicity. And I think that's where we all need to start to get to, is when we can say, okay, you eat different food from me, but where can we, find common ground?
Yeah.
I like how Pastor Bally just went to my next question, because I want us to talk more about our compatibility with each other. So much in society, we always talk about our differences, language, food, things of that nature. But when it comes down, it is down to how compatible. So let's talk more about the likenesses of both cultures.
We like chicken.
We're genetically dispositioned to love chicken, but I don't know. I wanted to say this to follow up, and I pray maybe I can answer that question as well. I think on both sides there are extremes, right? So the extreme, and I believe the extremes are what each culture holds on to place judgment on each other, So, for example, of course, Africans, there's some extremes. Like there's some, the 419s, the people that are just like, we see them as crooks, right? And the Black American community will look at the stories or the interactions of those people, the criminals in
wealthy for no reason.
Yeah, and just kind of place judgment on that, like all Africans are so-and-so, and it happens vice versa as well. So we have our community like, oh, well, no, we're not gonna, these African Americans, these Black guys, we don't mess with them, we don't talk to them, or whatever the case may be. So it's like that on both sides. I went to a barbershop the other day, and I get my head shaved, just in case you were asking why I went to a barbershop. Yes, I get my head shaved. And in the conversation, you know how barbershops are. It's just, they talk about all kinds of stuff, right? So somehow one of the barbers was telling a story about a Nigerian woman who came in with her son, and wanted a haircut. She came in like the typical, wanted to bargain, $5, and the guy was like, what do you mean? Your son is 22 years old. I'm giving him a full-grown haircut. I think he said like $20 or $25. She's like, for what? I'll give you $5. Like just going back and forth. And then from that, the whole conversation flipped. Like they were talking about how crooked Nigerians are, and not knowing that I'm a Nigerian sitting there in the seat, they thought everybody in there was just Black. So they just going on and just bashing. And I'm just sitting there just taking it, And my barber's like, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, Ray? They call me Ray, You know what I'm talking about, Ray? Yeah, these people. And I'm just sitting there like, wow, so this is what you actually think, But we are so much more alike, There's no difference. I believe, Doctor was saying that earlier. Like, there's really no difference. There's one race, and it's the human race. There's internally everything. There's nothing. We came from the same parents, Adam and Eve. Like we are all the same. We have different pigmentations. We have different skin color, but there is no real distinction between us as the human race. And I believe if everybody would have that sort of mindset that you're my brother, whether you're Black, white, yellow, orange, whatever the case may be, you're my brother, and your life matters the same way my life matters. Like, I believe, like, your education matters the same way my education matters, your family, just everything like that. I believe that we can find, I don't think there's nothing that would not be common between all of us. We just have to have that reconciliation like you were talking about, be reconciled back to each other. But the problem with that is reconciliation. There's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, So the reconciliation is both sides, right? I can forgive you and just continue to move on with my life, but that doesn't mean you forgive me or we're back, we're reconciled back, like we're on good terms and we can go on our lives, being good best friends. No, it just means that I've forgiven you and I'm choosing not to hold whatever happened between us, put it in my heart and live that way. So I've forgiven you and I've moved on. But reconciliation happens when you also forgive me. We come together and say, hey, listen, how can we make a change? So I believe that's what needs to happen in our community. Like, we're ready to reconcile. Is the other side ready to reconcile?
And even in saying that, I kind of feel like during this whole turmoil, with everything that's happening right now, the playing field has been leveled, because ultimately when you see a Black person, you don't see, oh, they're African American. We're Black. We're all Black. And so even when the protests were taking place, guess what? Black people around the world were protesting. It wasn't just Black African Americans here protesting. I have friends even in Dubai, telling me, hey, they're protesting in my country back home in Africa. Everybody was on one accord because they recognized, y'all, we're in the same fight, whether we like it or not. It's like things are being shambled in the mind, in the dynamics of the mind. People are realizing we got to come together because we all look the same. And if I was there, if my brother was there, my sister was there, this could be happening to them. And I think more conversations, like for instance, there are a lot of positives that take place between the cultures, like the significance of family. That actually, even if your family is broken, you are still going to be there for that family member. Like, it's just something that's ingrained in us. Now, there are different levels to how close the family may be, but you recognize there's a significance in family. I mean, even in, I had to break this down with my grandma because she's from a country area in Texas. And so she told me how she was growing up. They had to grow their own food. She had to go fetch water and stuff. And I was like, well, Granny, according to my African friends, that's like you was in the village. And she was like, what? And I said, yeah, Granny. And so letting her know that it helped her because she had only seen these negative shots that were from the media. And so her mind, she thought, oh, well, they're extremely poor. I was like, but Granny, you grew up in a similar way. I said, it's not different. And so when I broke that down, like, I even did the ancestry test for her. So she recognized that, look, your DNA has African DNA in there from different countries. So the reality is, we're connected. It's ingrained in our DNA, and some traditions have been passed down. And I feel like even when, like with slavery, a lot of times the slaves that were from Africa, they weren't fully stripped of their traditions, of their values, of their core beliefs. And so I've even recognized, talking to a lot of my African friends, there are a lot of commonalities. And I'm like, oh, wow. So that probably did come from our ancestors who were in Africa. And so just being intentional about finding the commonalities, because sometimes people block it out. They don't want to know. But I'm like, no, you have to take this into consideration, even with the foods. Some people are like, oh, I don't like African food. I'm like, but they eat this, we eat this. It's the same thing, probably just cooked differently. And so I have to like blatantly point it out, and unfortunately, everyone doesn't want to do that. But we have to have people willing to have those conversations without getting offended. And, even now in the same capacity with the whole white and black situation, people get mad at white people because they don't know something. But I'm like, this is our opportunity to educate them. And the same capacity, when African Americans are with Africans, don't get offended because somebody doesn't know something. If they ask a question, take it as a teachable moment. I'm an educator, so we look at teachable moments. I had an African student. He grew up in the States. And so I had to teach him on why he should value his culture, why he needed to want to go back and pour into his community. But he had this negative mindset of, going back to Nigeria. It was just like the worst thing for him. I said, I don't think you understand. You being here is a privilege. You were privileged to be able to be here, get a good education, and through you're going to be able to bless somebody else. And I said, every place that we come from, we have the ability to pour back into that. Like, it's very intentional how we are raised and the places that we end up going. And if we are successful, it's because we're supposed to go back and bless somebody else.
I'll go straight to the commonalities. I think they both covered on the house. No. I think both of you are spot on. The first thing I would definitely say is respect. Because I think there's one thing there's several things jarred me, of course, but the one thing that jarred me was the over-familiarity between younger people and older people. Where I was coming from, it was not a thing. It didn't exist. You couldn't just walk up to someone older than you and just talk casually. It didn't happen. You know, you don't just say to your dad, hi. Those are death sentences where I come from. You know, people are jailed for much less. I'm like, you say to your dad, hi. You're over. You cease to exist quickly. And maybe this was a Southern African American thing, but even I still think that it's more so across the country than it is just the South. African Americans are very respectful, and if nothing else, for sure, of their elders. So that was something that I found, you know, we had in common, and we both valued, right? The other thing, we may not like to admit it, and we may not like to. It may manifest differently, but I think we're very showy, materialistic cultures. We believe in dress. We believe in the cars. We may not wear the same clothes. We may not appreciate the same cars, but we invest a good amount of our resources in those types of things. When we do parties, we do it. You know, we it looks different, right? But you know, some cultures are popping bottles, some cultures are spraying money. It just depends on which way you go, right? We're not just having a nice sit down, 10 people invited and 10 people show up. No. We all do 10 people invited, 35 show up. You know, we have those things in common. Now, I like the fact that, you know, some of those things that, you know, definitely are strengths. Now, I'll go back to the commonality of materialism. I think, and this may be a broader critique of the race as a whole, the materialism, unfortunately, has also led to, I think, what has been a stunting of our development. So I would give this instance, and I think that the analysis is true of African, but also true of even African American as well. I just studied abroad in Korea years ago, and we sat down with the guy who used to be the chairman of LG. And so he gives his lecture, gives his talk, he talks about Korean development and business and all that, and how they basically got from independence to where they are. So it was awesome. And you know, you could tell the guy he'd done a lot of, you know, international business. So I got a chance to sit with him one-on-one, and I asked him, I said, you know, that how is it? You know, you guys were bombed into the next world in World War II, right? And then you're this, you know, powerhouse. I said, how did you get from that place to there? And I was trying to imply the, you know, comparison with Africa, right? That, you know, Africa never saw the kind of devastation. Granted, we saw a what would you call it, grand theft, right, of our resources and our people, but we didn't see the destruction. So I said, you know, how did you guys get from there to here? And he said to me quite briefly, he said that the problem is that when the wars happened and everything calmed down, that they had to make a choice. How were they going to recover from this? And their recovery was, okay, what do we have? They have steel. So, like, okay, what can you do with steel? Hence, you have the cars. Hence, you have the TVs. That's why it became like, the electronic hub. So you have your Daewoo's, your Kias, your LGs, your Samsungs, right? He said the important thing is that Africans value things. So he said when your leaders were leading, their measure of success was not what did I achieve. The measure of success was how much did I get for myself. And he said that has perpetuated, and that's why the system hasn't really changed in about 50 years. And when he said that, he was making a very simple analysis. Of course, not getting into the minutiae of the details of the circumstance, but now, that's not abroad. I was here, right? I was in UT Dallas, going to Korea. So by this point, I had my Nigerian experiences and a chunk of my American experience. So as he's saying these things, I'm realizing, oh wow, this is true of Africa as a continent, but it's also unfortunately true of the African American community, because when we're talking about the refund checks, right? And refund checks come and your check's 10,000, tuition is 3,000, you got 7,000, and you buy a car. Can we imagine how many investment portfolios could have been started with all those funds? You know, could we imagine how many small businesses could have been started with those funds? When we always hear the great innovation stories, right? And they sound cool on the Caucasian side. I don't know the math, so I'm not going to try. But imagine how can we approximate any number of dollars that have been lost with those refund checks that could have started the next Amazon or the next Berkshire Hathaway. So commonalities in culture, but also commonalities in weaknesses.
All right.
If we could, I guess I'm trying to form a question here. How do we educate? Because I think we're trying to get to the point of solutions, right? So how do we educate in the sense where, hey, how do we as a people create generational wealth, right? You know, we have, you know, the other communities know how to do this thing. They know how to, we see the Asians, the Chinese, the Indians, the white, like, they know how to do that. They have this generational trend of wealth that they can establish. Now, how do we as a people, on both sides, how do we establish that?
Well, it's funny because I feel like the shift is changing on both sides, just not together. So, for instance, I see it happening in the African American community, and then I see it happening in the African community. You know, you have people flipping houses, going into real estate. You have people who are they're training under, you know, Dave Ramsey and, you know, shifting the mindset. But I feel like based upon your teaching, if you come with the financial literacy, like the fact that you said you didn't know what a refund check was, like, because you had been trained to know that, you know, some people are trained to, you know, pay cash, you know, don't ever take out a credit card. Those are things that are told to some people. And I know even for myself, I wasn't educated. Like, when I got a refund check, it went to provide housing because I was living on my own by that point. But it's different for so many people because I feel like if you had the opportunity to tell an African American who's getting that refund check, hey, you might want to consider investing, because our minds would have been blown. Because as an undergraduate, I was not thinking about investments. I didn't know. I'm like, I'm just trying to have a roof over my head, continue taking my classes and making it through the day. And other people are splurging because in their mind, it's like, I just need the money so I can look like I'm successful. And so I feel like now it is an education element. Us educating each other, partnering, and a lot of times people don't think about the partnership. And you said it yourself, community. It's like we create these two separate communities, but if we came together, like, we would be a solid force to be reckoned with. Even in Houston, a lot of times, like Southwest, most people know that's where most Africans are living in Houston, on the Southwest side. And it's mainly because of connection, family connections. And so when they come to Houston, they're like, oh, such and such was here, so that's where they move. Yeah. And then African Americans, we're spotted out just among, and sometimes it's based upon our socioeconomic upbringing, because you'll have your African Americans who are brought up with more wealth. They'll be living like in Sugar Land or something, but that was because of how they were brought up. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like if we latch on to how people have obtained wealth and how they're maintaining it and how they're building that generational wealth, that will help us all to build it within our own communities. I mean, build it within the Black community as a whole. And so it really is just that education factor.
I think at some point there has to be a decision to change, right? So there are things. I think I'll speak personally, and I hope that it helps others. There are things that when you get to a certain age, you can either keep going the way you've been going, or you can hold up and say, you know what, this is not getting me anywhere. I need to make a change. And that, for me, that hasn't just been happening for me, but I've also been intentional about making sure that I pass that change on to my kids, because I can see I'm getting to the point where I've seen my community, I've seen my parents, I've seen the way I came up, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'm determined that the things that cause struggle there will not cause me to struggle. Or at least not cause me to struggle anymore. Now that I realize it, some of us are on cruise control. We're just going. At some point, we have to stop and say, whoa, this road is not helpful. I need to make a stop. Once the first generation does that, then, right, we can tell the next one, because it's the same, wealth begets wealth. But if you came into spending, guess what? Spending begets what? Spending. So if your folks went to college and spent, waiting for the check and spend it, guess what you're gonna do? You're gonna spend it, right? What are the odds? And I could be wrong. I apologize for not having this stack that I meant to look up before today. There is for example, what's it called? Revisiting when for convicts, the height of reincarceration is terribly high, right? Because that's what you've done, and somehow you get out or you do it again. The odds of a child having a teenage pregnancy is high if their mother was also. One of the things that has struck me in this society is when I would see a person, maybe like myself, maybe not much older, talking about, say words like my grandbaby. What? And you're looking at somebody, all I'm thinking is, how do I politely find out how old you are again? Because I thought we were on the same age, right? So I'm like, I gotta find a way to ask this question because my mind is blown at this point. Because they're just going on like this is normal conversation. I'm like, my head is still there, like, Grandma, what? My son's 8. What are you talking? How? My son's 8, and I think I started early. So I'm like, what happened here? But it clearly happened. What clearly happened is what happened to first generation happened again. Some generation has to break the chain. Some generation has to decide this is terrible. We're not gonna let it happen to the next one.
And so I'm actually a little surprised because I want to tie this into my next question. But one of the similarities is the impact of religion and how both cultures are very religious, spiritual. So what I would like to talk about, you guys to talk about, is what the church can do on both sides, and some solutions that the church itself can do to help the disconnect between both cultures.
Well, I think there are a few things, but one that comes to mind is having the church doors truly open to everyone. Truly open. Yeah, we say, we can quote scripture, come as you are, but are your doors truly open to everybody, whoever they are, whatever their skin color is, whatever their culture is, actually open to them coming to your church? In my experience now, Pastor, I could be completely off, but in my experience, I've seen that the Nigerian community church, right, we don't really lose any sleep. It's not really a drive to get anybody into the church house that is outside our culture. It's not like a real thing, if it's an African church and the house is full of Africans, Nigerians, or whatever, or Africans as a whole, we're good. We don't really lose any sleep as to, man, why is my church not diverse? Or, we don't really lose that type of sleep. But I've seen on the other aspect, men and women of God that are not African, really make an effort to pull in different people, to pull in, the African, pull in the white, pull in everybody, just because they want to be more diverse. They want to reach more people. They have all kinds of events. They do all kinds of things, just to draw in different kinds of people. I know you do it. I know I do it. But as a whole, I don't think the African church really strives to do that. So if we can do that, because what ties us together is the blood of Jesus. So if we can have our doors truly open to everybody, anyone and everybody, I believe that can go a long way.
So I want to flow up something, because there's something that I think are part of the press with what you just said. I think that people have to also, I guess it also depends on what do you think church is. I think there are some overt answers to that question, but what we all don't like to admit, there are very covert answers to that question as well. Not in a mean way, but just subconscious, right? No matter how we want to deny it, if you are intentional, you have to realize church is a cultural event, right? It is a known fact that Sunday morning is the most celebrated time in America. And I don't say that because it is an intentional security checking who's at the door. It's just because we go where like minds gather. And that's just the truth. So when you will naturally flow, because at your job, you can't help it, right? But you figure out, I can choose where I worship, so I'll work with people who are a lot like me. Now, the point you're making, right, about the fact that we don't try. But I think people have to go deeper into that not trying, into how they don't try. And it's everything, because what a lot of our leaders will tell you is, well, I'm anointed. Well, the word is right? I can preach powerfully. Why should I have to change my accents? They must hear the word of God like this. And I'm like, well, I'm not trying to force anybody to code switch. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you should fake what you're not. But you have to be aware. I know men of God with thick accents from all over the world who have diverse congregations. So that excuse in of itself for me is just, no, that's not it. But if we can be a little graphic for the folks at home, and we can send, if you want a breakdown, we'll send it to you later. If you are having a gathering, and every time you gather, Amala Ewedu is being served, you do not want a non-Nigerian there. Yeah. You have said, without saying, that people who are not Nigerian are not welcome. If I come to your service, and the person at the door is tiny giddy that looks like a satellite in space, you are saying, I will come into your church, I will academically critique your service, but I will not be, I do not think that this is what I am one of, right? Because it is so clear that there's differences, right? The ability for church, because yes, we worship the same God like you rightly said, but church is a gathering of faith, but in our society is also a gathering of culture. For us to meet the people, one of the things that I believe, I'm not just training the people in terms of what the Bible says. I'm also teaching them, I think my primary goal, and I know we share this, is also how they can use that word. If we don't teach them to have empathy and compassion on a Sunday morning, where we have some input, do we expect them to then go and show those things outside? Now, guess what they do? We're training them to do. We're training them to show compassion and empathy to the people in their church. So that's why we see our people who say on Sunday, brother this, sister that, I'm also respectful, I'm also quiet. On Sunday morning, how dare you cut me off? How dare you? God will punish you. My God will send thunder your car. But yesterday, you were just in church saying how God was great, right? So if we as a church, and I'm saying this owning up that we are part of the church and we're part of the body, and we thank God we're trying to have a conversation, but we have to own up to our own responsibilities as well. We have to become more intentionally open, but not just because we want a goal of diversity in the church and many people are here. No, I mean, that is a great thing, because that is what heaven will be like. That's what I believe. I have to know these people now because whether I like it or not, I'm going to meet them in heaven, right? But the people who do worship, for the people who are your congregation, who are your sheep, those people need to know that empathy cannot just be to the person who looks and sounds like you. You have to be able to show empathy for the person who is from a whole different background, right? And so we have to start that, even in the churches.
And even as you were speaking, honestly, it's a pride issue with a lot of leaders. There are a lot of pastors who don't have the mindset that this ministry is surrendered to God, not me. And so in their mind, they're like, I'm cultivating it from my vision versus cultivating it from God's vision. And so it takes, humility, definitely, because you have to be humble to look into your congregation and say, something's not right. And you have to take ownership, and you have to definitely, say, okay, why? You have to ask that question. Why is my congregation only one group of people? And you have to be intentional. So I've seen environments, I've seen groups of pastors from different ethnicities intentionally come together, and they, set up events together to bring their congregations together. And I think, I'm a dreamer, but I'm like, partnership. Even with me being African American, I know a lot of African pastors, and I know that was God's doing. I don't know how that will manifest, but ultimately I feel like it will open the door, for more African Americans and Africans to come together and worship together and embrace both types of worship, because ultimately the worship is connected. I mean, we love to worship on both sides. It's vibrant. We just like to pour our hearts out to God, and it's something that brings us together. And so when I think about it, I think about how more multicultural churches and more predominantly white churches, they'll bring in our worship. They'll bring in a guest speaker or a guest singer, and that would have us flooding there. But I'm just like, okay, well, let us be intentional, okay? If my church is predominantly African American, let me bring this African pastor here, and let us think about, what are some of the things that his culture has that we can apply and add, because even my church, the pastor is African American, but we have some African members. And so, there are times where she's acknowledging that. She's started doing missions with some of our church members' countries. And so that's just one step. And so now you have other African Americans who are adamant about bridging that gap. And so, we connect, we partner up. And I just feel like we have to intentionally go out and say, hey, I'm going to partner with you. It may be for a bowling night. Our two ministries. Let's go out and bowl,
Doc, look, the problem with that, the pride, you said it, right? It's just that, the men and women of God, or pastors, it's like a competition, right? I want more people in my church. I want my congregation to be bigger, or whatever the case may be. So if I'm trying to I want to be kind of on my own. If you're not part of a string of ministries RCCGs and Dominions, or whatever the case may be, if you're not in that type of, you're kind of it's almost like a competition. So you don't want to really partner with somebody because you're afraid that maybe somebody will take your members from your church. Right? And that's a fear, for a lot of pastors, right? That's why they don't want to do stuff. They don't want to do stuff, partner with other pastors, partner with other ministries, because it's this pride thing. No, I want my church to grow. This is me type thing, right? It's not necessarily God's, vision or will. But then again, I want to add this. we're not trying to say, or at least I'm not trying to say that every church must be like this, right? I'm not saying that, because there are churches that deal with there are language barriers as well, right? So there are Hispanic churches, there are African churches that have different dialects, right? And they have those specific, so they can minister to those people in their languages, right? So that's not, that we're not trying to tell you to shut that down and, what you're doing is not, biblical or whatever the case may be. That's not what we're saying. We're saying if you have the opportunity, to do this, or to reach out, or to broaden, or to just bring people into because our mission is one mission, right? We have one mission: to propagate the kingdom of heaven, to preach the gospel, right? Make disciples. That's the mission, right? So if you can, as a church, as a ministry, pull in, you have the opportunity, you have the platform, language is not a problem for you, then you should be doing it, right? But then there's specific churches, like I know some Christian, Chinese churches, some Indian churches, stuff like that. Like, do what the Lord has blessed you and anointed you to do, right? In our church, we do like this international praise night where, we have different cultures, whoever you are, wherever you're from, we kind of try to bring everybody in and have a worship session for like 2 hours, right? That's an attempt, right? So I'm not saying everybody should do that, but at least try to bridge that gap, or if there is a gap there, just try to bridge that gap. Try to pull, cultures and people and, ethnicities, everybody together, because we are one body of Christ.
Do you have any questions yet?
We have no questions. I was going to ask if anyone had final thoughts as we're dwindling down on time.
Well, I'll just say, I really feel like that we're in a now time. We're in a space where this is now. This needs to be addressed now. And I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that God is being very intentional about how he's using his people. And it is exposing, but, with exposure, that light is shining. So it's like, okay, well, we know who actually has the heart of Christ right now. And we're not going to wall on those who aren't on board, but instead, he's giving clear vision of how he wants us to operate for his kingdom. And he shut down so much stuff, literally, but also spiritually. He's like, I need you guys to unify and come together. And it's been heavy on the hearts of many. Like, I know I've had these discussions with numerous individuals because I'm passionate about it. I just feel like we're so connected, and we have to be intentional about maintaining and cultivating that connection, because with the Black community, period, we've been beaten down. Even in Africa, you've had your own turmoil happening in Africa. And I feel like the Black race has just had so many battles. And for us to be divided, even amongst ourselves, that creates even more division. And I know it's the enemy, because in reality, if we come together, there's something God needs us to do. But we have to be on one accord for it to get done. And so I just really feel like this is an opportunity for us to now move forward and take those steps. Even if it is a small step, like you said, your worship nights, that's a huge first step. Because first of all, you're honoring God, but you're recognizing that he can be honored in different ways. And so that opens the door for other people to come to the knowledge that God is not limited to just one type of person. Like, he operates in a big way.
Good. For me, now, last words, now is the time for the gospel. Like, that's been my message for the past, I don't know how many weeks, possibly a couple months now. Like, now is the time for the gospel more than any other. Like, if there's no better time in history than now for the gospel. And I think it's time for the church to rise up. It's time for the church to rise up and to preach this gospel, to bring the light to the world. Because right now it's heavy, it's dark out there. Like injustice, just racial inequality, just all kinds of stuff are just out of nowhere, just popping up. 2020 has been a great year, So, but now is the time for the gospel, and it's the best opportunity for the church to rise up. And if we can, once we can rise up, I believe there's nothing that can stand in the way. Like, there's nothing that is impossible for God to do once we can rise up and speak the gospel. Everybody be on one accord. That's my last words.
I'm reminded of the incidents when Peter was dreaming and the Lord showed him all this, what was at the time forbidden food, and he said eat, and he said, Lord, this is the food, this is unclean food, I shouldn't eat this. And God said, no, I want you to eat, right? And that was a precursor for him going into a Gentile's house. I think, as a reminder of that, I think that we are in a season of first steps. There is no other time than now to take the first steps. And as you were sharing, and when you were saying about what you thought was a small thing, I'm like, it may be a small thing, but it's a major thing. Because the first step, right, allows the run to be possible. The run is impossible on the couch. The run is a dream in bed. But the first step, it has so many possibilities. The walk, the stroll, the run, the sprint, the marathon, whatever. It all begins with the step. So I want to just encourage everyone tonight that, look, we are here talking about a myriad of issues. We kind of talked on academics, talked about, my financial habits, and I came back, obviously down to church and faith. But I want to encourage everyone that find your first step. Right? It's interesting, when we came into this building, we sat down, I think it was earlier this year. We sat down with the servant leaders and we asked, what, God has put us here for a reason. What can we do? We tried to kind of break notions of what we had done, because we have been a mobile church for over 4 years, and then now we're finally planted somewhere. We said, okay, what can we do? And a lot of things. Now, what was interesting about the conversation was a lot of things that came out of it weren't necessarily churchy. They weren't necessarily about Bible study and prayer meetings. We talked about having business forums. We talked about having a chance for minority leaders to come in and we'll set up a booth. We're like, look, yes, we have church here on Sunday. What else is happening here the other 6 days? Can we make use of the space in a way that can empower people, that can still connect them to God? Okay, we're having businesses. Make sure your business is not in the adult industry or whatever, right? We're going to make sure that your businesses are things that we can vouch for, right? And things that, will be aligned in vision. Now, of course, we don't want to own the businesses, but we want to give people platforms. And as you were sharing, I'm like, those are all steps. Too many of us think, but never take a single step. For us as a church, that may be our step. For you guys, the worship night is your step, right? For all of us individuals, we're going to have to make some tough calls. For some of us, I know those of us who are parents, one of the awkward moments is when your children are really small, they can't go to their friend's house without the parents coordinating. And if that parent is not African, those conversations can be they get awkward really easy. Let me rephrase, they have the potential to get awkward. Hopefully, if everybody's cool, it goes well. But if one party is not cool in that conversation, it can go south, to say the worst, right? But I realize that if for some of you, that may be your first step. I know a lot of people who told me that they gained friends from just, coordinating play dates with parents, and next thing they get talking, and business opportunities and ministry connections and all kinds of things come out because of that first step. All of us cannot say that our kids are going to be restricted to having, in our case, right, immigrants, second generation children as their only friends. No, that's not right. taking my children to parties of their schoolmates and their classmates all over. They have a blast. It might be lonely for me, but they're having a blast. But I'm intentional. I won't let them not have that. So they go. They definitely go. My wife, either one of us will go, and they have a blast. And if I can, we strike a conversation. We find common ground. You'll be surprised. Sometimes there's little, but sometimes there's a lot. Wherever you are, I want to encourage you. What is that thing that you have found awkward, that you have found unnecessary, that you have maybe found just like, this is too tough, I'm just not going to do it. I've been here for 10 years, 20 years, what I'm doing is work for me. You're right, it may have worked till now, but could there be more? Could you have been even better placed? Could you have been even better integrated if you had taken the steps to go out? So on both sides, I'm hoping and praying that we have any thoughts before we head out. Okay. Now I'm very careful about when we use this title, it was intentional, right? Sides of a coin. We were intentional that it not look like two people on opposite ends, or let me use it, two groups, right, on opposite ends having a conversation. And we're also very, very deliberate that all of us who are up here, yes, we have our personal experiences, but we were not necessarily like rooting for one side, right? We were rooting for our general integration, our general move forward, but not like where it's a debate where one side has to win or lose, right? I'm gonna have more points than you. It was never about that, because like I said, we are one coin. You can't be mad at yourself, right? They say in marriage that, I always tell couples that when you hurt your spouse, you hurt yourself. I said, when you accept that, conflict resolution becomes very easy. It becomes easier, right? It's a little simpler. So that is what I want us to remember, guys, that we are part and parcel of the same coin. Dr. Ashlei said something earlier as I close, and this is for my immigrant community. When you get pulled over, when you fill the forms, when all those things happen, we all check black. Let's not forget that. It may be convenient in our sitting on our high horses to think that there's a difference, but understand that at the end of the day, the things that affect one inadvertently affect all. Amen. So, guys, this has been a tip of a conversation, and I'm glad that we've been able to have it. I want to really, really thank and appreciate Pastor Ruemu, Dr. Ashlei for making the time out. I appreciate you guys so much. I do ministry, and I can tell you that getting folks who do ministry to come out after church on Sunday is a miracle by itself. But these are folks who really called on and reached out and been able to sit and enjoy a meal with, and they're always ready to jump on the cause of the work. And that's why I really, really appreciate you guys, your insights, your counsel. It has meant a whole lot. I hope that you all have been blessed. We will see you guys again soon. Jesus House will be back next week, next Sunday evening as well. We'll be having another Faith Over Fear prayer and worship night. We will not worship in the morning. We'll be worshiping in the evening next week Sunday as well. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.